The storm did not want their lives. It wanted their despair, and they merely fed it. One room, one rising tide. The sea was patient, so was the lie carved into the wood. Our story begins now. The perihelion had been running ahead of the weather since dawn, and by the 4th hour of the afternoon, the sea had stopped pretending to be water at all. It moved like something muscled. Each swell lifted the hull with a slow, deliberate patience, held it at the top of the rise as though considering, and then let it fall. And every fall drove a shudder up through the deckboards into the soles of Hermione Granger's boots. She stood at the starboard rail with her hood torn back and her hair flattened to her skull, and she did not go below. Salt had crusted at the corners of her mouth. There was a peculiar taste to it, mineral and old, nothing like the clean brine of a summer coast. The clouds ahead had gone the wrong colour, not the slate of an honest North Sea squall, but a bruised, sulphurous yellow-green, the shade of a healing wound. Lightning moved inside them without ever reaching the water. It flickered laterally, cloud to cloud, a slow pulse like something breathing. That is not weather, she thought. Weather does not repeat itself, because it was repeating. She had counted. 11 seconds, a flare in the northeast. 11 seconds, a flare directly overhead. 11 seconds northeast again. A rhythm too even to be accidental, and she had spent 6 years of her life learning that anything with a rhythm had an author. Behind her, the deck hatch banged open and slammed shut against the wind, and she knew before she turned who had come up. There was a particular quality to the silence a person makes when they arrive somewhere they do not want to be and refuse to announce it. "You've noticed the interval," Draco Malfoy said. He had come to the rail 4 feet away and no closer, the precise distance he had maintained for 11 days at sea, measured out as carefully as a potion ingredient. His coat was black and expensive and utterly unsuited to this, the collar turned up, the shoulders already dark with spray. His hair was plastered to his forehead. It made him look younger and worse, less like the man the ministry had contracted at considerable cost, and more like the boy she remembered standing in a drawing room with his hands at his sides, saying nothing at all. 11 seconds, she said. 10 3/4. He did not look at her. He was watching the yellow-green wall build itself out of the horizon. It's been shortening since noon. When we boarded, it was closer to 14. Hermione's fingers tightened on the rail. The wet iron bit cold into her palm. It's contracting. Yes. And you've known since noon. I told the captain at noon. Now he turned his head, and the flat grey of his eyes caught the strange light off the cloud and threw it back green. The captain informed me that he has sailed this passage for 31 years, that the ministry is paying him by the crossing and not by the hour, and that he did not require navigational advice from a... He stopped. From a what? Hermione said. The corner of his mouth moved. It was not a smile. He was inventive. You'd have enjoyed it. She looked away first. She always looked away first with him, and she despised the reflex. And it happened anyway. Some old animal calculation in her body that had never quite accepted that the war was 6 years finished, and this man was on her payroll. They had spoken perhaps 40 sentences to one another in 11 days. She had catalogued them. That was the humiliating part. She had catalogued them, the way she catalogued everything. 40 exchanges about tide tables and containment protocols, and the correct handling of a 14th century curse cache, and not one of them had touched the thing that stood in every room they shared, like a piece of furniture no one would name. The ship rose, hung, dropped. The impact of the hull against the trough went through her teeth, and somewhere below a great deal of crockery gave up all at once. Granger. His voice had changed. Look at the water. She looked. Ahead of the bow, perhaps 100 yards out, the sea had gone flat. Not calm. Flat. A perfect disk of stillness, perhaps 200 feet across, with swells 30 feet high, heaving on every side of it, and not one ripple crossing its border. The rain fell on it, and did not dimple it. It lay there in the middle of the storm, like a pane of black glass set into a wall of moving stone. Every hair on Hermione's arms lifted at once. "Turn the ship," she said. "I've told him twice. Turn the ship." She was already moving, shouldering along the rail toward the wheelhouse, and Draco was moving with her, and the wind chose that moment to change its mind entirely. It did not gust. It dropped. A total, sudden absence, as though someone had shut a door on the world. The roar of the storm cut to a hush so complete she could hear the water running off her own sleeves onto the deck. In the silence, the perihelion slid over the boundary of the flat place. The change ran through the vessel from bow to stern in a visible wave, a shimmer in the air like heat off summer flagstones. Hermione felt it pass through her, a deep, low vibration in the marrow of her shins, in the small bones of her wrists, in her back teeth. The lanterns along the deck rail all flared green together and went out. Then the perihelion began, very gently, to turn on her own axis. No hand at the wheel, no wind. The ship rotated in the black glass like a compass needle finding north, and above them the cloud opened into a slow spiral with its eye directly overhead, and out of that eye came a sound that was not thunder. It was lower than thunder. It had tone. Hermione's wand was in her hand. She did not remember drawing it. "Below," Draco said. "Now. The crew. Below." His hand closed around her upper arm. It was the first time he had touched her in 6 years, and the shock of it went through her ribs like a swallow of neat spirits. And she let him pull her, because the deck was tilting now in a direction decks did not tilt, and because some part of her that was not proud had already understood that the boat was no longer theirs. They went down the companionway with the ship canting beneath them. The passage lamps had gone the same drowned green. Water was already running down the steps behind them in a thin, persistent sheet, and it was warm. That was the detail her mind seized and would not release. The water was warm, blood warm, and the North Sea in October is a cold that stops your heart in 90 seconds. A door on the left stood open. Draco put his shoulder into her back, and they went through it together as the perihelion rolled hard to port, and the door swung shut behind them with a sound like a coffin lid. Then, quiet. Hermione got to her hands and knees on the boards. Her breath came in ragged pulls. She could hear water, a great deal of water, moving somewhere very close. And beneath that, a fine, high whining note, right at the edge of hearing, that made her eyes ache. She looked up. It was a passenger cabin. Her passenger cabin, she realized. Her trunk under the bunk. Her notes still waited on the little fixed desk beneath a chunk of quartz, the ink pot standing perfectly upright, though the ship had just rolled 40 degrees. A brass lamp swung on its gimbal. The single porthole showed nothing at all. Not sea, not sky, only a soft, even blackness like the inside of a closed hand. Draco was already at the door. He tried the handle. It moved freely, all the way down with no resistance whatsoever, and the door did not open. He tried it again, slower, watching the mechanism. Then he set his palm flat on the paneling and said a word in something old, and the wood beneath his hand flushed a dull ember red and cooled again. "Warded," he said. "By what?" "That's a considerably better question than by whom, and I don't like that you asked it correctly." He stepped back and looked at the frame. Top, hinges, sill. With the particular narrow attention she had watched him give to cursed objects for 11 days, and which she had refused, out of pure stubbornness, to admit was very good. "Granger, your lamp." She turned. The brass lamp had stopped swinging. It hung dead vertical while the floor beneath it sloped visibly toward the door, and the small flame inside it had gone a color that flames are not. "The gimbal's frozen," she said. "The gimbal's correct. The lamp is hanging true. It's the room that's wrong." His voice was perfectly level, and she noticed, because she noticed everything, it was her curse, that his left hand had closed slowly into a fist at his side, and that the knuckles had gone the white of old bone. "We're not in the ship's frame of reference anymore." Something struck the far side of the hull. Once, a single enormous knock, unhurried, deliberate, the way a person knocks who knows the door will be answered. Neither of them moved. Hermione became aware, in the ringing quiet afterward, that the water sound had grown louder. She looked down. A dark line had crept in beneath the door, half an inch of it spreading across the boards in a slow tongue, catching the green lamplight. It reached her knee where she knelt and soaked into the fabric, and it was still warm, and it smelled of salt and of something else beneath the salt, faintly sweet, like flowers left too long in a vase. "Malfoy. I see it." "How fast?" "Slowly." He crouched, touched the surface with 2 fingers, and rubbed them together. His jaw shifted. Deliberately. That word landed somewhere under her sternum and stayed. She got to her feet. She smoothed her sodden sleeves down her forearms, once, twice, tugging the cuffs straight through they were streaming wet, and there was no possible sense in it, and she made herself breathe and think. "Right," she said. "The porthole." "Sealed. I looked before you'd finished falling over." "Then the deck above, if the anomaly has a boundary, and it does, it had an edge we sailed across." She stopped, because Draco had gone entirely still. He was staring at the door. Hermione turned. In the center of the upper panel, the grain of the wood had begun to move. It was not carving. Nothing cut it. The pale lines within the timber were simply travelling, curling and knotting themselves into shapes with the unhurried certainty of frost spreading across a window. And as she watched, the shapes resolved into letters, and the letters into words, and the words rose to the surface of the wood, the way a bruise rises through skin. The lamp guttered green. The water climbed past her ankle. She read it twice, and the second reading was worse than the first. "Only the one who sacrifices themselves may leave." Nobody said anything for a long moment. The sea knocked again against the hull, patient as a landlord. Then Draco Malfoy walked forward through the rising water and put his hand flat against the words, covering them with his palm as though he could push them back into the wood, as though if he only pressed hard enough, the door might be persuaded to have said something else entirely. He did not turn around. He did not need to. She could see the answer in the set of his shoulders, and the sight of it emptied every argument she had ever prepared against this man straight out of her head. "Don't," Hermione said. He did not take his hand away. "Don't what?" Draco said. His voice came out flat and unhurried, the voice of a man reading a column of figures aloud, and Hermione had known him long enough to understand that this particular flatness was the sound of something being held down with both hands. "Don't stand there deciding things." "I'm reading a door." "You've stopped reading it. You read it 8 seconds ago." The water had reached the middle of her calves now, warm and heavy, dragging at the wool of her trousers. "You're doing arithmetic. I can hear you doing it." That got him. His shoulders shifted a fraction, not a flinch. He had never in his life permitted himself a flinch, but a small readjustment, the tell of a man who has been seen from an angle he did not offer. He turned around at last and leaned his back against the door, arms folded, and looked at her with an expression of such elaborate boredom that she wanted to throw the ink pot at his head. "By all means," he said, "enlighten me. What arithmetic?" "You've calculated that there are 2 of us and 1 exit. You've calculated that the Ministry will survive the loss of a contracted curse-breaker with rather more equanimity than the loss of the deputy head of magical law. You've decided that this is a matter of simple institutional economics, and that the sum comes out one way, and you were about to be quiet about it until it was too late for me to argue." She was shaking. She refused to look at her own hands. "How am I doing?" The brass lamp hissed. Green light slid over the wet paneling. "Adequately," Draco said. "Then stop. I haven't started anything. You've been standing with your palm on a curse for 1.5 minutes. Take your hand off my door." "It's not your door. It's my cabin." It stopped being anybody's cabin the moment the grain rearranged itself. He pushed off the wood and moved past her, and the water parted round his knees in slow, oily rings, and she caught the smell of him. Rain, wet wool, something faintly astringent, the herbal bite of the salve curse-breakers use on their hands. "Sit down before you fall down. You've been standing in warm seawater for 4 minutes with your pupils the size of knuts, and you're going to faint, and I would very much prefer not to have to hold you up. I have never fainted in my life. Then this will be a novel experience for us both." She sat. She hated that she sat. The bunk was already damp, and the mattress gave under her with a soft, obscene sound, and she pulled her knees up out of the water and wrapped her arms round them, and made herself, by an act of will she would have described to anyone else as routine. "Think. Rules," she told herself. "Everything has rules. Even this. Especially this." She looked at the room properly for the first time. 8 feet by 11. 1 bunk, fixed. 1 desk, fixed. 1 chair, not fixed, currently drifting gently on its side against the bulkhead like a dead animal. A brass lamp on a frozen gimbal, burning a colour that had no business in a flame. A porthole full of nothing. Her trunk beneath the bunk, her notes weighted under quartz on the desk. Dry, she noticed. The notes were dry. Water had come up over the desk's lower drawer, and the parchment 8 inches above it lay untouched, uncurled, not so much as a spot of damp on it. Malfoy. My notes aren't wet. He stopped. He came back 2 steps and looked where she was looking, and something moved behind his face. No, he said slowly. They aren't. The water's selective. The water is considerate. He reached out and touched the top sheet with the back of one finger, and his hand came away dry, and Hermione watched him take that fact and file it somewhere with a small, precise motion of his jaw. It's not flooding the room. It's filling it. There's a difference, and I don't like either of them. Filling it to a schedule. Filling it at a rate calculated to be noticed. He turned. In the green light, the hollows under his eyes had gone the colour of old plums. Granger, how long have we been in here? 6 minutes, perhaps 7. Guess again. She opened her mouth to say something withering, and then followed his gaze to the porthole, and the withering thing went out of her entirely. The blackness had thinned, not to sea, not to sky, to a soft charcoal grey, the exact quality of light that comes an hour before a winter dawn, and against it she could make out very faintly the shape of the ship's rail, and beyond it a horizon that was not moving at all. 7 minutes ago it had been mid-afternoon. That's not possible, she said. Say that again. It's very comforting when you say it. It has the ring of an incantation. Malfoy. 9 hours, near enough, if the light's honest, and I've no reason to think it is. He dragged the floating chair upright, set it against the desk, and sat down in it with his boots in 8 inches of water and his elbows on his knees. And only then, with his hands hanging loose between them, did Hermione see that they were unsteady. He noticed her noticing. He laced his fingers together, and the tremor vanished. Right. Talk to me about the inscription. It's a bargain ward. Obviously, it's a bargain ward. Talk to me about the language. She was already reaching for the quartz, sliding her notes out, unstoppering the ink. Her hands wanted a task, and she gave them one, because the alternative was sitting still in a filling box, with the words on the door glowing faintly behind him, like something breathing in a corner. It presented in English, she said, which means nothing. Bargain wards render in the reader's tongue. That's standard. That's how they've worked since the lachrymal texts. The rendering is a courtesy. Underneath it, there's a source formula, and the source formula is what actually binds. She wrote as she spoke, quick and cramped, the nib scratching. So the English is a translation, and translations are choices. Whose choices? The caster's. 600 years dead. Then the choice was made 600 years ago, and it's still being made every time somebody reads that door, which frankly is worse. She looked up. Whoever built this wrote the English version too, Malfoy. Not the ward. Them. They sat down and chose the words a drowning person would see. The lamp hissed. Somewhere above them, very far off, the sea knocked twice against the hull. That's an ugly thought, Draco said quietly. It's the only useful one I've had. He was watching her now with an attention that had nothing polite in it. It occurred to her, irrelevantly, unhelpfully, that she had never in her life been looked at by him in a way that did not have an edge somewhere on it, and that this was the first time the edge had not been turned toward her. Then test it, he said. Test what? Your theory, that the door is a liar. He unlaced his fingers. Wards that bargain have to be fair. That's the whole architecture of the thing. They can't take what isn't offered. They can misdirect, they can conceal, they can phrase a truth so it sounds like the opposite of itself. But they can't state a falsehood, because the moment they do, the contract voids, and they lose the power to hold anything at all. So, the sentence on that door is true. It's simply not true in the way we're meant to hear it. Hermione's quills stopped. Say that again. Which part? They can phrase a truth so it sounds like the opposite of itself. It's not a novel observation, Granger. It's the second chapter of every text on. Stand up. What? Stand up, she said. And she was already off the bunk and wading past him, water shoving heavily round her thighs, and she went to the door and put her face 6 inches from the wood. The letters lay in the grain like veins under skin. Only the one who sacrifices themselves may leave. Read it aloud, she said. You've read it. Read it aloud and lie. There was a pause behind her. She heard him rise, heard the drag of water round his legs, felt him come up at her shoulder, close enough that she could feel the heat coming off him through 2 soaked layers of wool. And she did not step away, and she noted with some distant clinical horror that she had chosen not to step away. Only the one who sacrifices themselves may leave, Draco said, and then evenly. It means what it says. It wants a life. The wood did nothing. Again, said Hermione. Different lie. Something specific. Something about you. Granger, you said it can't state a falsehood. Then it can't tolerate one either. A bargain ward that permitted lies in its own hearing would void itself in a fortnight. It's structural. It has to react. So lie to it, and let's see what the reaction looks like. And then we'll know what truth looks like, and then we'll know how to read the sentence. She turned her head. He was very close. His eyes in the green light had gone the colour of wet slate. Unless you'd rather stand here doing sums. Something happened at the corner of his mouth. It was gone before she could name it. Fine, he said. He looked at the door. I don't care, he said, whether you get out of this room. The grain shuddered. It ran through the whole panel at once, a fast, tight ripple like wind crossing a wheat field. And the letters distorted, smeared, ran together into a single black bar of shadow, and then reassembled, and the air in the cabin went suddenly and unpleasantly cold. The water dropped 4 degrees against her legs. Hermione's ears popped. Then the words settled back exactly as they had been, and the temperature climbed, and the room was as it was. Neither of them moved for a long moment. Well, Draco said, and his voice was not entirely under control. That's a very informative result. It rejected it. It rejected it violently. Which means the mechanism is live and it's listening, and it distinguishes true statements from false ones in real time. She was writing again, fast, her wet sleeve leaving a grey smear across the parchment edge. Which means we can interrogate it, which means Granger. Means that if I put a series of propositions to it and observe the Granger. She stopped. Draco was still looking at the door. You understand what I did, he said. You lied to it. That was the point. That was the entire... I made a statement about my own intentions, and it registered as false. He said it very quietly, and he still had not looked at her. You asked me to lie. So I chose the thing I most needed you not to hear, and I said the opposite of it, and the room has just told you which one was which." The lamp guttered. Hermione stood very still in the warm black water with the quill dripping ink into it, and felt the entire careful architecture of the last 6 years shift half an inch beneath her. "That was reckless," she said. Her voice came out wrong. "It was efficient. You wanted data. You could have said anything. You could have said the sky was green." "It is green." He turned round at last, and there was nothing bored left in his face at all. "You'd have discounted it. You'd have said the ward can't pass figurative statements. You'd have said colour terms are subjective. You'd have written 4 objections in that appalling handwriting and demanded a better test, and we'd have wasted an hour we don't have. So I gave it something with no ambiguity in it whatsoever." He shrugged, and the shrug was the least convincing thing she had ever seen him do. "Now, we know the rules. You're welcome. Malfoy, the water's at your hip." She looked down. It was. And when she looked up again, he had already turned back to the wood with his wand out and his jaw set, running the pale light of a diagnostic charm along the sill in slow horizontal passes, shutting the conversation as neatly as a door. And she stood there with 100 things stacked behind her teeth, and not one of them able to get past the sudden unbearable knowledge that the room had heard him first. Time in the cabin did not pass so much as accumulate. Hermione measured it the only way she could, by the water. It had come to her hip when Draco began his diagnostics. It was at the base of her ribs when he finished. Somewhere between those 2 marks, the light in the porthole had thinned from charcoal to the pale grey of a morning that never quite arrived, and hung there, unmoving, refusing to become day. They had dragged everything that mattered up onto the bunk. Her notes, the ink, the quartz, Draco's coat, folded with an absurd precision that had made her want to laugh, and then, unaccountably, to cry. They sat on it with their backs to opposite walls and their legs drawn up, 6 feet of ruined mattress between them, and they worked. "Say it again," she said. "I've said it 4 times. Say it a 5th. I want the rhythm." He tipped his head back against the panelling and closed his eyes. In the green light, the line of his throat looked carved out of tallow. "Solus qui se ipsum sacrificat exia potest," he said, or something very near it. The formula's older than the Latin. The Latin's already a translation. That's the point. It's a translation of a translation, and by the time it reaches English, it's been through 3 sets of hands, and every one of them had an opinion. And sacrificat means what you think it means. It means what 600 years of frightened people have decided it means. She pulled the top sheet toward her. Her handwriting had gone jagged. She could see the exhaustion in it, the way the letters leaned. Sacer facere, to make sacred, to set apart. It isn't a word about dying, Malfoy. It's a word about transfer, about moving a thing out of the profane and into the holy, and the profane is simply where a thing is when it belongs to you. Granger. And the entire theological machinery of the term is concerned with relinquishment, not with destruction, which are not synonyms, which have never been synonyms. Granger, you've said this. You said it an hour ago, and you were right an hour ago, and you're still right. And it doesn't matter, because we are not in an argument with a lexicon. We're in an argument with a room that is currently drowning us on a timetable. Hermione put the parchment down. "I know," she said. "Then stop translating." "It's what I have." Her voice came out smaller than she intended, and she despised it. "It's the only tool I brought. You have your hands and your diagnostics and 11 years of curse work, and I have—" She gestured at the sodden pile. "This. Words. If the words are a trap, then I've got nothing at all. So forgive me if I go round the same corner 4 times looking for a door." The silence that followed had a texture to it. "That's not nothing," Draco said. "It's not enough." "Those are also not synonyms." He said it without inflection, without looking at her, and it landed under her ribs anyway. "You found the mechanism. I've been breaking wards for 11 years, and I'd have spent a day on the sill before I thought to interrogate the phrasing. You got there in 9 minutes. And it's told us nothing. It's told us it lies by omission and not by statement. That's the difference between a locked door and a hostile one." He opened his eyes. "Sleep? Don't be absurd. You've been awake for 22 hours, and you've stopped being able to hold a quill straight. I've watched you write the same word 3 times. He nodded at the parchment. "Relinquishment, twice, and then something that might be Gaelic." She looked down. It was, in fact, 3 times. "An hour," she said. 2. 1, and you wake me, and we start on the sill together." "Fine." She should have known then. That was the thing she would come back to afterwards, turning it over like a stone in a pocket for the rest of her life. That he had agreed too quickly, and that she had been too tired to hear the shape of it. She lay down on the damp mattress with her back to the bulkhead and her cheek on her own folded arm. And the last thing she was aware of was the green light swinging on nothing, and the small industrious sound of water finding a new level, and Draco Malfoy sitting 6 feet away with his hands very still. She woke because the room had changed pressure. It was the same feeling as a window opening in a sealed house, a shift in the weight of the air against her eardrums, subtle and absolutely wrong. She was upright before she was properly conscious, and her hand had found her wand, and the water was at the level of the bunk now, lapping over the edge of the mattress, soaking cold up through the wool into her hip. Cold. It had been warm for 9 hours. It was cold now. Malfoy. He was at the door. He had his sleeve pushed to the elbow, and his forearm laid flat against the wood across the inscription, and the letters had come alive beneath it, no longer sunk in the grain, but standing proud of it, black and wet and glistening. And where they met his skin, they had begun to sink in, the way ink sinks into blotting paper, spreading in fine dark filaments up the inside of his arm toward the crook of his elbow. His head was bowed. His other hand was braced against the frame. He was speaking, very low, in the old tongue, and she did not need to translate it, because she had spent 9 hours reading the grammar of exactly that construction. I offer. Take it and let her out. Draco. The name came out of her without permission, and it was the first time in her life she had used it, and she did not notice. She went through the water. It was chest deep, and it fought her, heavy as syrup, and she got 3 strides and shoved her shoulder into his side with everything she had, and it was like shoving a wall. He did not move. He did not even look at her. Go and stand by the porthole, he said. Take your arm off the door. When it opens, don't stop to argue with me about it. Go up the companionway, port side, it'll be. Take your arm off the door. She got both hands round his wrist. His skin was fever hot, and the black filaments beneath it were moving, threading, seeking. And when she pulled, he braced, and for a moment they were simply two people straining against one another in rising water with nothing said at all. Then the ward answered. It did not open the door. It convulsed. The sound was the worst part. Not a bang, but a long, dry tearing. The noise of a great sheet of parchment being ripped down its length very slowly, and the letters flared white-hot, and the black threads in his arm reversed direction all at once, and went back into the wood like something recoiling, and Draco Malfoy was thrown off the door and across the cabin. He went into the water and under it. Hermione had him by the collar before he surfaced. She hauled him up and back against the bunk with strength she did not know she owned, and his head lolled, and there was blood coming out of his nose in a thin, fast line, black in the green light, running over his mouth and down his chin and into the sea. Draco. She had his face in both hands. Look at me. Look at me. He coughed. Salt water and blood came up. His eyes found her and did not focus, and then, terribly, did. It didn't take it, he said. Be quiet. Granger, listen to me. This is data. He tried to sit up and failed, and gripped her forearm instead, hard enough to bruise, hard enough that she felt the individual points of his fingers for 2 days afterward. It didn't refuse, because it wasn't sincere. Do you understand? A bargain ward can't take an insincere offer. It simply doesn't respond. Nothing happens. There's no reaction. It's like posting a letter into a wall. That was a rejection. That's an active mechanism. It heard the offer, it evaluated the offer, and it threw it back. You could have died. I was counting on... She hit him. It was not a slap. It was the flat of her hand against his shoulder, and it had no force in it at all. And it was the single most undignified thing she had done since she was 19 years old. You waited, she said. Her voice had gone to pieces somewhere, and she could not find where. You waited until I was asleep. You sat there, and you agreed to 1 hour, and you were lying. You were lying the entire time. You looked at me, and you said, fine. And you had already... Yes. Why? Because you'd have argued. Blood was still coming. He wiped it with the back of his wrist and only spread it. Because you'd have argued well, and I'd have listened, because I always... He stopped. Something in his face shut like a fist. Because there are 2 of us, and 1 exit. And you were right about the arithmetic, Granger. You were right about all of it. You always are. And I would simply rather not have had the conversation. That was not your decision to make. It was entirely my decision to make. On what authority? On the authority, Draco said, of being the one of us who is more easily spared. The water lapped at the edge of the bunk. Somewhere the sea knocked once against the hull. Hermione discovered that she was still holding his face. She discovered it slowly, the way you discover you have been standing on a broken foot, the information arriving from a long way off, and then all at once, the heat of his jaw under her palms, the wet of his hair against her fingers, the pulse going hard and fast in his throat under her thumb, blood on her hand. 6 years of not touching, and now this. She did not let go. "Say that again," she said. "I'd rather not." "Say it to the door." He went very still. "No," he said. "You made me watch you nearly kill yourself for a diagnostic. You said it was data." Her thumb moved once, an inch along the line of his jaw, and neither of them acknowledged it. "So, finish the experiment, Malfoy. Turn your head and say to that door that you are more easily spared than I am, and let's see whether it shudders." The green lamp hissed on its frozen gimbal. He looked at her for a long moment, and she watched the refusal arrive in his eyes and watched him understand that she had seen it arrive, and watched the two of them arrive together at the thing neither had yet been willing to name. Then he closed his eyes and turned his face fractionally into her palm, once, before he pulled away. They did not speak of it. That was the arrangement, arrived at without a word being exchanged, in the way that all their arrangements had ever been made. He did not say to the door what she had asked him to say. She did not ask again. He cleaned the blood off his face with a scrap of shirt tail, and she turned her back while he did it. And when she turned round again, he had his sleeve buttoned to the wrist over the fine grey tracery the ward had left in his skin. And they went back to work as though the last quarter of an hour had happened to two other people in a different room. The bunk was under water now. They had moved to the desk, the only fixed thing left with a surface above the tide, and Hermione knelt on it, which was undignified, and Draco stood beside it in water to his waist, which was worse, and between them they had built a small archipelago of dry things: parchment, ink, quartz, wand. "Read me the third line again," she said. "You've memorized the third line. Read it anyway. Your accent's better than mine, and I want to hear where the stress falls." He did not comment on the compliment. That was another thing about him she was being forced hour by hour to revise. He did not collect compliments. He let them go past him like weather. He read. She listened with her eyes shut and her fingers moving on the desktop, tapping the meter out. "There," she said. "See ipsum. It's emphatic. It's not just reflexive, it's insisting. One's own self and no others. Which supports the obvious reading, or excludes something." She opened her eyes. "Malfoy, what if the emphasis isn't there to tell us what's required? What if it's there to tell us what won't be accepted?" He looked at her. "Say more. You offered yourself last night." She kept her voice clinical. It cost her something to keep it clinical. "It threw the offer back. And you said a bargain ward can't take an insincere offer. But that's not what happened, is it? It didn't ignore you, it fought you. It evaluated the terms and rejected them. Which means the terms were wrong. Not the sincerity, the terms. So it wants a life, but not mine. Or it doesn't want a life at all, and we've been reading the wrong noun for 600 years. She dragged the parchment toward her. "Give me an hour on the source formula. Don't argue. Just give me an hour and don't do anything at all while I have it." There was a pause. "An hour," Draco said. "Say it properly." "I'm not going to touch the door for an hour. Look at me and say it." He looked at her and said it. And Hermione, who had spent 9 hours learning exactly what this room did to a false statement, and who had positioned herself, without appearing to, directly in the line of sight between his mouth and the inscription, watched the grain over his shoulder and saw it lie perfectly still. "Good," she said, and she began, very carefully, to plan. It took her 4 hours, not 1, and she spent every minute of them being useful, because the only way to hide a thing from Draco Malfoy was to bury it under an avalanche of visible honesty. She translated aloud. She showed her working. She let him take the parchment out of her hands and cross out 3 of her lines with a stub of pencil and write better ones. And she let him see her be irritated about it, which was not difficult because she was. And underneath, she built her argument. It was a good argument. That was what she told herself while she assembled it, piece by piece, with the water climbing the desk legs and the light in the porthole holding at its impossible grey. It was arithmetic, exactly as he had said, and the arithmetic had not changed simply because his hands had shaken when he'd offered his own answer to it. He tried, and it refused him. That was fact 1. It refused the offer, not the offerer. That was hypothesis, and hypotheses required testing, and there was precisely 1 variable in the room that had not yet been tested. Fact 2, which she did not permit herself to look at directly. He had said more easily spared, and he had believed it, and the door had not made a sound. Fact 3, which she looked at even less, her hands on his face, and the moment before he pulled away. She waited until the water reached the desktop. He was at the porthole with his back to her, running the pale line of a diagnostic charm round the frame for the 9th time, and the light of it laid his shadow long across the surface of the water. And Hermione slid off the desk into the cold and went to the door with her wand already out and her left sleeve already pushed up past the elbow. She did not speak the old tongue. She did not have his accent, and she did not have time. She said it in English, which the door had gone to such trouble to provide. "I offer myself," she said, and she drew the wand tip across the inside of her forearm, not deep, a hair's breadth, the way you score parchment before folding, and pressed the wound flat against the words. The reaction was instantaneous. The letters came up to meet her. They did not sink in as they had with him. They rose out of the wood like frost flowering across glass, and the black filaments went into the cut and up her arm in a single searing rush, and it did not hurt the way she had prepared for. It was worse than pain. It was arithmetic. She could feel the thing counting her, running down the length of her like fingers down a spine, weighing, sorting, opening drawer after drawer of her, and looking inside. She heard the diagnostic charm die. She heard the water break behind her. Then Draco Malfoy's arms went round her ribs from behind and tore her off the door. They went backward together into the water, and he did not let her surface easily. He hauled her round, one arm across her chest, and slammed her spine against the wet panelling of the far bulkhead, and pinned her there with both hands closed round her forearms, and his face perhaps 6 inches from hers. The black threads were still fading in her skin. He was looking at them. 4 hours, he said. He was shaking, not the fine tremor of cold, his whole frame, hands and shoulders and jaw, the way a horse shakes. Let go of me. 4 hours you sat on that desk and translated at me. I said, let go, and corrected my Latin and told me my accent was better than yours and the entire time. His grip tightened. The entire time. Yes, Hermione said. Say it again. The entire time. She could not get enough air. His hands were hot through her wet sleeves, and the wall was cold against her shoulder blades, and her own pulse had gone somewhere unreliable. You did it to me first. That is precisely an answer. It's the same answer. It's the answer you gave me 11 hours ago, and I didn't accept it either. She wrenched one arm, and he did not let go. You waited until I was asleep. I waited until you were busy. The only difference between us is that you got to be noble about it, and I have to be ashamed. You could have died. Yes, so could you. That was the point. That was the entire point. That has been the point since the grain moved. Her voice cracked straight down the middle, and she hated it and kept going. One of us has to, and you have already decided which one. You decided it before the door had finished writing itself. You decided it 6 years ago. Don't. And I am not going to stand in a flooding box and let you spend yourself on me like small change, Malfoy. I am not going to be the reason. Do you understand? I have been the reason for enough. Don't! The word came out of him raw. They both stopped. The water moved between them, cold and slow at the level of her waist. His hands were still round her forearms. Neither of them had looked away, and Hermione discovered, with a clarity that frightened her, that she could feel his heartbeat where his wrist lay against her arm. Fast, hard, entirely out of proportion to fury. You want to know why it refused me, Draco said. His voice had dropped almost to nothing. You've been circling it for 4 hours. You've written it out twice and crossed it out both times. Ask. I don't. Ask. Hermione's throat closed. Why did it refuse you? She said. He let go of her left arm. He did not step back. He raised his hand, slowly, with the terrible carefulness of a man handling something that has already broken once, and turned her right forearm over between them and pushed the sodden sleeve back to the elbow. The ward's black tracery was almost gone. Beneath it, white and raised and 6 years old, the word she had stopped seeing in mirrors sat in her skin. She had not shown it to anyone in 4 years. She had certainly never shown it to him. He looked at it. He did not flinch, and he did not perform tenderness. He simply looked, the way he had looked at the door, as though it were a text he had been refusing to read. Because I have wanted, for 6 years, he said, to be permitted to pay for that. And a bargain ward can taste the difference between a gift and a debt. His thumb moved once across the inside of her wrist, an inch, and stopped. It didn't refuse my life, Granger. It refused my bookkeeping. The lamp hissed. The water climbed. And Hermione, who had built her entire adult architecture on the certainty that she knew precisely what this man owed her, and precisely how little of it he had ever offered, found that she had nothing in her mouth at all. Nothing but his name, which she did not say, and the sudden, unbearable warmth of his thumb, going still against her pulse. He let go of her wrist. It was, she thought afterward, the single most deliberate thing she had ever watched a person do. The slow uncurling of each finger, the withdrawal by degrees, a man taking his hand off a live wire and making certain the wire understood it had been a choice. He stepped back into the water and turned away and said in an entirely different voice, "It refused your bookkeeping too. I don't have any bookkeeping. You have ledgers, Granger. You have libraries of ledgers. He waded to the desk and set his palms flat on it and looked down at the floating parchment. You just walked up to that door and offered it a life, and the whole time you were doing your sums you were thinking one thing, and I could hear you thinking it from across the room. I have been the reason for enough. You said it out loud 30 seconds ago. Whose entry is that in? Because it isn't mine. She pulled her sleeve down over her arm. That's not what. You're paying for something. I don't know what, and I don't intend to ask, because I have precisely no standing to ask. But it tasted it, the same as it tasted mine, and it spat you back. He turned his head. In the green light, his face had gone all planes and hollows, the face of something carved for the side of a building. We keep offering it our guilt with a life wrapped round it, and it keeps handing back the life and asking for the parcel to be repacked. Hermione stood very still in the cold water. Say that last part again. Which part? Asking for the parcel to be repacked. Something in the room changed pitch. She could not have said what. The lamp did not alter, the water did not stop. But her ears popped as they had when the ward convulsed, and every hair on her arms rose, and she knew with total animal certainty that she had just walked past the thing in the dark and brushed it with her sleeve. "Get me the third sheet," she said. "The one with your pencil on it. Now." It took her 40 minutes, and it was the best 40 minutes of her professional life. And there was 3 feet of freezing sea in the room by the end of it. They worked shoulder to shoulder because there was nowhere else to be. The desk had gone under. They stood in the middle of the cabin with the parchment held between them above the waterline, one edge in his fist and one in hers, and passed the pencil back and forth like a surgical instrument. "Read the clause," Hermione said. "Solus quise ipsum sacrificat." No, the clause before it, the one everyone skips because it's formulaic. Draco's eyes went down the sheet. Quod servatum est. Translate. That which has been kept. It's boilerplate, Granger. It appears in 400 bargain wards. It's the standard preamble for... He stopped. She watched it arrive in him. She watched his pupils widen fractionally in the green light, and his grip go tight enough to crumple the corner of the parchment, and she felt a savage, shameful, entirely unromantic surge of pure academic joy. "It's not a preamble," he said. "It's the object. It's the object of the verb. It's the object of the verb, and every translator for 600 years has passed it as a subordinate clause, because it reads like one, because whoever wrote it built the syntax so it would." She was talking too fast, the words tumbling. "Quod servatum est, solus quise ipsum sacrificat exire potest." Not only the one who sacrifices themselves may leave. Read it properly, Malfoy. Read what it actually says. He read it. "Only the one who gives up that which they have kept back," he said slowly, "may go out." The lamp flame stood absolutely straight. "It never wanted a life," Hermione said. "It has never once wanted a life." It said so on the door in plain English, and it said so in a way that would be misread by every frightened person who ever stood in front of it. "And we have spent..." She looked at the porthole, at the grey that would not become morning. "We have spent a day and a night trying to hand it the one thing it explicitly refuses, because sacrifice means dying to us. It doesn't mean dying. It has never meant dying. It means the thing you set apart, The thing you keep back. From whom? What? Kept back from whom? Draco let go of the parchment. It went into the water, and neither of them moved to save it. That's the actual question. A thing isn't kept unless it's kept from somebody. Servatum implies a withholding. A withholding, he agreed. So the ward isn't asking what we own. It's asking what we've refused to give. The sea knocked twice against the hull. Hermione became aware of a sound she had been hearing for some minutes without registering it. A change in the note of the water. It had been lapping. Now it was moving with intent, a low, steady rush somewhere beneath the boards. And when she looked down, she found the level had come up past her ribs, while they stood there being clever. Malfoy. I see it. It's accelerating. It's rewarding us. He said it with a kind of disgust. We've read the sentence. The clock's changed because the terms are now understood, and an understood term is an enforceable one. It's not a puzzle anymore. It's an invoice. Then we pay it. With what, Granger? With anything. She was already pushing through the water toward the door. It's a bargain ward. It evaluates. We make offers until something registers. That's the whole architecture. You said so yourself. It can't take what isn't offered, but it must consider what is. You want to stand in freezing water and read out an inventory of our possessions. I want to stand in freezing water and not drown. And if that requires an inventory, then yes, Malfoy, I want an inventory. And I want it in the next 4 minutes, because in 11 I won't be able to reach the door. He came. That was the thing she kept, out of all of it. He did not argue. He did not sneer. He did not spend a single second on the dignity he had been rebuilding for 6 years. He came through the water and stood at her shoulder in front of the door with his sleeve pushed up and his jaw set, and he said, "You first. You're better at declarative sentences." So they began. It was the strangest hour of Hermione Granger's life, and she would never afterward be able to describe it to anyone, because described from outside, it was merely 2 soaked people shouting nouns at a piece of oak. "My wand," she said, and laid it against the wood. Nothing. The grain lay dead. "My work." She had to stop and steady her voice. "The department, the post, 10 years of it. Take it. I don't. Take it." Nothing. "My memory," she said, and her hand shook. "The war, all of it. Take the whole 6 years. Take them out of me. I've wanted them gone since I was 19. The wood did not so much as ripple. "It won't take pain," Draco said. "Look at it. It's not even considering. Pain isn't kept back, Granger. Pain is the thing we can't stop handing to people. You've been trying to give that away for 6 years to anyone who'd stand still. Then you try." He put his hand on the door. "My name," he said. Nothing. The house, the land, the vault at Gringotts, the whole of it, every galleon. Nothing. Not a flicker. "My mother's letters." His voice did not change at all, which was how Hermione knew. 40 of them. Everything she wrote me while I was. Everything she wrote me. Nobody has read them. Nobody has been permitted to read them. The grain moved. It was very slight, a single slow ripple, no more than a shiver crossing wheat, and then it stilled. They both stared. "That was a reaction," Hermione whispered. "That was a near miss." He took his hand off the wood as though it had scalded him. It considered and declined, which means we're in the right category. God help us. Things kept from everyone. Things kept from everyone. He looked at her. It weighed 40 letters my mother wrote me from a house I couldn't enter, and it decided they weren't sufficient. The water reached the underside of Hermione's collarbone. She had to lift her chin. Then what's left? She said. Nothing. That was the last of it. That was the last thing I own that nobody has ever. He stopped. She watched him stop. She watched the sentence run into something in the middle of him and break apart against it. And she watched his face do something she had never seen it do in 14 years of knowing him. It went completely, helplessly blank, the way a man's face goes when the floor is discovered to be somewhere other than where he has been standing. "What?" she said. "Nothing. Malfoy. It's nothing. It's..." He turned his head away. The cords stood out in his neck. "It doesn't apply. You went white. The water is 4 degrees above freezing. You went white before." She caught his sleeve. The wool was heavy with sea, and his arm beneath it was rigid. "You thought of something. 12 seconds ago you thought of something, and you would rather stand here and drown than say it out loud, which is remarkable, Malfoy, because I have watched you offer this room your mother's letters without your voice changing." "Yes." "Then what in God's name is worse than..." "Nothing is worse," he said, and it came out of him like something torn. "That's the entire difficulty. It isn't worse." The lamp flared once, green and steadied, and Hermione, standing chest-deep in black water with her fingers closed round his sleeve and her chin tilted up to keep her mouth clear of the tide, felt the answer arrive in her own body a full 3 seconds before it reached her mind, arrive as heat across her face and a lurch behind her sternum, and understood exactly what he was refusing to say, and understood that he had seen her understand it, and neither of them was able to look away. Neither of them said it. The water rose 4 inches while they stood there not saying it, and Hermione heard her own breathing go shallow and quick, and hated the sound, because it was not fear, and because he could hear it too. "No," Draco said. "I haven't asked you anything. You were assembling it. You assemble out loud, Granger. It's the worst-kept secret in England. You are building the sentence, and I am telling you now, before you finish it, no." "On what grounds?" "On every conceivable ground. Name one. Look at where we are." He gestured, a violent, uncharacteristic movement that sent water slapping against the panelling. "Look at the room. It is filling. There is a clock. You cannot put a person in a box with a clock and a locked door and then ask them for..." He stopped. "Say the word," Hermione said. "No. You'll say vault and letters and mother, but you won't say..." "I won't say it here," he snapped, "with 3 feet of water and a countdown, because the moment it is said in this room, it stops being a thing anybody can want and becomes a thing somebody has to do. There is a name for what that is, and I would rather drown." The lamp hissed. Hermione stood very still and let that go through her, all the way through, and found on the other side of it something she had not expected, not embarrassment, something quieter and much worse. "That's very decent of you," she said. "It isn't decency, it's the bare minimum." "No, I mean it. It's decent and it's careful, and it's the most careful thing anyone has said to me in years, and I need you to understand something before I say the next part." Her voice was steady. She did not know where she was getting it. "You're protecting me from being coerced. I've been coerced by better and worse than a locked door, Malfoy, and I know the taste of it, and this isn't it." "You can't possibly." "Because I thought of it first." The water moved between them. "That's not true," he said, but the certainty had gone out of him. "It is. I thought of it before you did. I thought of it an hour ago, when you said things kept from everyone, and I stood there and did the inventory in my own head and arrived at the answer and did not say it out loud, and then you arrived at it and went white, and I let you go white." Her chin was up out of necessity now. The tide had come to her throat. "So, if we are apportioning shame, I'd like my share, please. I've never been good at letting you take it all." Draco closed his eyes. "Granger. Don't. Granger." He opened them. "You are asking me to believe that the woman who has not voluntarily been in a room with me since she was 18. I've been in a room with you for 2 days. Has spent an hour concealing the same conclusion I've been concealing, and that this is a coincidence, and that the coincidence is not simply what happens when you put 2 people in a sealed box and threaten them until the animal parts of them start looking for exits. Is that what you think it is?" "I think that's what it would be," he said. "For anyone. For any 2 people. That's the point. That's why the answer is no." Hermione's feet came off the boards. She had not expected it, and she made a small, undignified sound, and then she was treading water in a cabin 8 feet by 11, and the ceiling was suddenly a great deal closer than it had any right to be. Draco caught her arm and pulled her toward the door, where the frame gave something to hold, and they hung there together with their fingers hooked over the lintel rail and their bodies 1/2 foot apart in the black. The inscription was under water now. She could see it glowing faintly beneath the surface, greenish, patient. 2 hours, he said. Perhaps less. Yes, there will be a better idea. There won't. There is always a better idea. You produce 4 an hour. You produced 6 yesterday before breakfast. There is no breakfast, Draco. His name again. She had not meant it again. He went quiet. The water lifted them both an inch. Somewhere in the hull, far off, the sea gave its slow knock. "Tell me why you think it would work," he said at last. "Properly. Not because it's the only thing left. Argue it." And she was so grateful for that, so absurdly, painfully grateful to be asked for an argument at the end of the world, that for a moment she could not speak at all. "Because of the grammar," she said. "Quod servatum est, that which has been kept back, not withheld from circumstance, withheld from a person. Everything the ward rejected today, we'd already given away somewhere. My work is public, your money is on ledgers, my pain I've handed to every friend I have, until they flinch when I come into a room. Your mother's letters came close. And do you know why they came close? Because they're the only thing you own that you've never let a living soul touch. And it still refused them. Because a letter isn't kept from anyone. It's just unopened. She had to spit water. She was slipping. He got his forearm under hers without comment. It has to be a thing that has been offered and not given. That's the whole shape of the word. A thing people have wanted from you and asked for and been refused. You're describing... I'm describing the only two things in this room that fit. Her voice had gone to a thread. And I want to say the other part now, and I want to say it once and never again, so please have the courtesy not to interrupt. He didn't. There were people, Hermione said. Good people. One of them very good indeed, and patient and kind, and everybody we know assumed it had happened years ago, and I let them assume it, because the alternative was explaining, and I could never explain it, because the explanation was always the same, and it was never, I'm frightened, and it was never, I'm waiting for marriage, and it was never anything respectable at all. It was that every single time, at the last moment, some entirely unreasonable part of me stood up and said, not like this, not out of loneliness, not out of gratitude, not because it's late and he's decent and I ought to. She was crying. She could not tell in the water, and neither could he, and she chose to allow it. I have spent 6 years being the most sensible woman in Britain, Malfoy, and I have kept back exactly one thing, and I have kept it back because I'm apparently a romantic, which is the single most humiliating sentence I have ever said aloud. The ward glowed under the water. Say something, she said. I'm not going to say something. I'm going to say the same thing back to you, and then you'll have to live with it. Then say it. Pansy, Draco said. Astoria. 2 others whose names you'd recognize, and one you wouldn't. Every one of them entirely willing, and every one of them, at the last, standing there while I found a reason. His voice was almost conversational. That was how she knew. And I told myself for 11 years it was strategy, or fastidiousness, or that Malfoys don't, whatever Malfoys don't. It wasn't. It was that I have known since I was 15 years old precisely what I was keeping it for, and the answer was so completely impossible that admitting it would have made me a joke in my own head. The water pressed them up toward the deckhead. There was perhaps 18 inches of air left. Look at me, Hermione said. He did. Say the impossible thing. No. Draco, if I say it now, in here, you will never afterwards know whether I meant it or whether the room made me. His fingers tightened on the rail beside hers. And I have spent 6 years being a thing you couldn't be certain about. I am not going to be that in this as well. And there it was. Hermione felt something in her chest come apart. Not break, open, the way ice goes on a river in spring, with a sound and a shift, and then the whole current moving. Then don't say it, she said. Say the other thing, the true one. The one you already said to the door on the first night when you thought you were being clever. He went absolutely still. You remember that. I have thought about it approximately 9,000 times. The green light wavered under the black surface between them. His hair was plastered to his forehead. There was salt in his eyelashes. He looked 24 and he looked 15. And he looked like a man standing at the edge of something with his coat already off. I care, Draco said, whether you get out of this room. The wood did not shudder. Hermione let go of the rail. She had nothing to hold, and she did not want anything to hold, and the water took her weight, and she reached through the 18 inches of air and put both hands on either side of his face, the way she had once before, with his blood on her fingers. And this time she did not stop there. That's all I needed, she said. That's the whole of it. Not I love you, not in here, not with the clock. Just that. Granger. And now I am going to ask you a question, and I want you to understand that I am asking it as a woman treading water in a room with 2 hours left, and not as an equation. And if the answer is no, then the answer is no. And we will spend the 2 hours arguing about Latin, which is honestly not the worst way I have imagined going. Her thumbs moved once across his cheekbones. He shut his eyes. Do you want this? Not the exit, not the ward. This. If the door were standing open behind you and the sun were out and there were a boat waiting, would you want it? The silence lasted 3 seconds. It was the longest 3 seconds of her life, and she would spend a great many years describing it badly. Yes, Draco said. And then his mouth was on hers, and the last of the air went out of the room, and neither of them noticed at all. The water stopped, not slowly. It halted between one heartbeat and the next, and then it began, impossibly, obscenely, with the same unhurried courtesy it had shown in everything, to withdraw. Hermione felt the change before she understood it, the pressure easing off her ribs, her feet finding boards that had not been there, the ceiling retreating. She broke away from him with her hands still on his face and her mouth open on a word she never found. It's going down. I know. Draco, I know. He was breathing as though he had run a mile. His forehead came down against hers and stayed there. Don't move. Don't do anything clever. Let it. They stood. The sea drained out of the cabin as though someone had tilted the world by a degree, down past their chests, their waists, their knees, whispering away through seams that had not admitted it, and did not now admit it leaving. It left the boards dark and steaming faintly in the green light. It left the bunk sodden and the desk streaked, and her ruined parchment plastered flat against the bulkhead like a handbill on a wet wall. It left them standing in 8 feet by 11, of nothing at all, 6 inches apart, with the whole of the air suddenly available and no idea what to do with it. It's giving us the room, Hermione said. Yes. That's, she laughed, and it came out cracked and appalled. That's revolting. Yes. It's watching. It's a ward. It doesn't watch. It waits. He lifted his head. His hands had come to rest at her elbows, and he seemed unaware of it. And I want you to hear me say something before anything else happens in this room. Don't. I'm going to. Draco, if you say something noble now, I will genuinely. It isn't noble. His eyes were very grey and very steady. The water stopped when you asked me a question, and I answered it. Not when we made a bargain. When I told the truth. His thumb moved on the inside of her arm. So the terms have changed. If you want to stand here for 2 hours and argue about Latin, we argue about Latin, and I will consider it the best evening of my life, and I want that on the record before you decide anything. She looked at him. The lamp swung at last on its unfrozen gimbal, and the flame in it had gone from green to a small, ordinary gold, and it laid an entirely different set of shadows across his face, warmer and therefore crueler, because it showed her what he actually looked like when he was frightened. You've been holding your breath since I let go of the rail, she said. I have been holding my breath since 1994. That's a very long time to hold anything. It is, Draco said. It's an absurd length of time. It's the most ridiculous thing about me, and there is a great deal of competition. Hermione took hold of the front of his shirt. Then put it down, she said. Afterward, she could never lay it out in order. It came back to her the way weather comes back, in pieces of sensation with no chronology, each one perfectly whole. The sound his hands made in her hair, that was the first thing, and she had never once considered that hands made a sound, but there was salt dried in it, and his fingers went through and caught, and the small rasp of it was the loudest noise in the room. The cold. Everything was cold. The boards, the wall she found her back against, the wet wool that had to be got rid of and would not go, and the shocking, indecent heat of skin underneath it, which made her make a noise she did not recognize as her own. His shirt, when she got it open. The grey tracery still faint on his left forearm, where the ward had gone into him. The mark beneath it faded to the colour of an old burn, and the way his whole body went rigid when she put her mouth against it, and the way it did not go rigid when she did not stop. Granger. No, you don't have to. I'm aware of what I have to do, she said against his skin. Extraordinarily aware. It's the entire problem with me. There was a moment when he stopped. She would think about it for the rest of her life. They were on the ruined mattress by then, and the whole of the cabin had gone gold and swinging in the lamplight, and he had her face in both hands, and he stopped, absolutely still, looking down at her from 6 inches away with an expression she had no name for. "What?" she said. "Nothing. You've gone white again." "I've gone white," Draco said carefully, "because I have imagined this in some form roughly 4 times a week for 9 years, and I did not imagine it correctly. And the correction is..." His voice went considerably more than I can currently manage. Hermione put her hand flat over his heart. It was going like something trapped. "Then don't manage it," she said. She was frightened. She let herself be. That was the discovery of the hour, and it undid every plan she had ever made about herself. That she could be frightened and stay. That the trembling in her hands did not have to be corrected before she was permitted to be touched. That there was no examination here to fail. He was slow. That was the thing that broke her in the end. Not the heat and not the closeness, but the slowness. The way he stopped at every threshold and waited. The way he read her, the way he had read the door. Palm flat, patient, listening for what the material wanted. "All right?" "Yes." "Say it properly." "Yes," she said. "You appalling man, yes." And she pulled him down. There was pain, and it did not matter. It went past like a stone dropped into deep water. And what came after was not what she had spent 11 years being told to expect by novels, and by frightened school friends, and by her own careful, defended mind. It was not transcendence. It was something far stranger and better. It was recognition. She had known this man since she was 11. She had known the sound of his footsteps in a corridor, and the particular quality of his silence in a courtroom, and the exact set of his shoulders when he was about to say something unforgivable. And here, now, in the swinging gold light, she found she knew this too. The shape of his breath changing, the place at the base of his throat where his pulse showed, the way his hand fitted around the back of her neck as though it had been measured. Nothing about it was new. That was the impossible part. It was as though she had been handed back something she had lost so early she had never known she owned it. Somewhere in the middle of it, she said his name. He stopped again, 1 beat, no more, and pressed his mouth to her temple and said something into her hair that she did not catch and did not ask him to repeat, because she had heard the shape of it, and she was not ready, and neither was he, and the room did not need to know. Later, the lamp had burned low. They lay on a wrecked mattress in a cabin that smelled of salt and wet oak, and, faintly, absurdly, of the ink that had spilled across the boards. His arm was under her neck. She had her hand on his ribs and was counting, without meaning to, the rise and fall. "The door hasn't opened," Draco said. "No. You've been watching it for a quarter of an hour. I've been watching the ceiling and thinking about the ablative and only incidentally about the door." She turned her head. "You've been watching it for a quarter of an hour." "Yes." Neither of them moved. Outside, for the first time in what the porthole insisted had been 31 hours, the light was changing. The grey had thinned towards something with colour in it. Very faintly through the hull came a sound that was not the sea's slow knock. A rhythm, distant, mechanical, the wrong tempo entirely. "That's an engine," Hermione said. "That's several engines." She sat up. She was aware of herself in a way she had never been in her life. Bare shoulders in gold light, hair a catastrophe, the ache of a body that had been used and had enjoyed it. And she found, testing the feeling carefully, that she was not ashamed at all, and that the absence of shame was the most disorienting thing that had happened to her in 2 days. "Draco." It didn't open. "I'm aware. We gave it—" She stopped. Something cold went down her spine that had nothing to do with the air. "We gave it the thing. We gave it exactly the thing, the only thing. It fits the grammar in every particular, and the water stopped." "The water stopped before," he said. She turned round. He was propped on one elbow, and he was not looking at the door anymore. He was looking at her with an expression of such naked, undefended dread that she understood, instantly and entirely, that he had worked something out 15 minutes ago and had lain there in silence, letting her sleep against him rather than say it. "Before what?" she said. "Before anything happened." His voice was very quiet. "It stopped when I answered your question. Not after. During. I've been lying here for 20 minutes, trying to make the sequence come out any other way, and it won't." "Then what did we just—" The blow against the hull came from outside, and it was not the sea. It came again, 3 times, deliberate, high up near the deckhead, iron on wood. And then a voice, muffled and ragged and utterly, impossibly familiar, shouting a name through several inches of oak. Hermione's whole body went rigid. "That's Harry," she said. They moved. There was no dignity in it, and afterward, Hermione was grateful for that too. That their first minute, as whatever they now were, consisted entirely of scrabbling for wet clothing in a swinging lamplight while somebody hammered on the outside of the hull. Her blouse had gone under the bunk. His shirt was inside out, and he put it on that way and did not notice for some time. "Hermione!" "Here. Harry, we're here." "Don't shout at the wall," Draco said. "Shout at the door. The wall's 4 inches of oak, and the door's the only thing in this room that's been listening." She went to the door. The inscription was still there. She had known it would be. She had known it from the moment she woke and found him watching it, and she had spent the intervening seconds refusing to look. And now she looked, and there it stood in the grain exactly as it had risen 31 hours before. black, unhurried, entirely unchanged. Only the one who sacrifices themselves may leave. Something happened in her chest. It was not panic. Panic she knew. Panic had a shape and a set of procedures. This was a slow structural failure, a building going down in the middle, and she watched her own hands come up flat against the wood, as though checking whether it was really there. "It didn't take it," she said. "No. Draco. It didn't take it." "I know." He was behind her. He did not touch her, and she understood with a distant clarity that he did not dare. "Move back from the door. Whatever they're doing out there, they're doing it with a great deal of force, and I would rather you weren't standing in front of—" "We gave it everything." Her voice had begun to come apart. "We gave it the only thing left. There is nothing else. I catalogued it. I stood in that water and catalogued the entire contents of 2 lives, and there is nothing else. And it has looked at it. And Granger. And it has declined, which means it wants a life after all, which means the entire translation was wrong, which means I have spent 31 hours being brilliant at a door, and I have—" His hands closed on her shoulders and turned her round. "Look at my face," he said. She looked. "I do not," he said, "for 1 second in any part of me believe that what happened in this room was a payment. And if the door disagrees, then the door has made an error, and I will spend the rest of my life saying so." "That is the least practical sentence you have ever—" "It's the most practical sentence I've ever said." His grip tightened. "Because if we do this wrong now, if you decide in the next 90 seconds that it was a payment and the payment failed, then you will walk out of here carrying that, and I will not be able to take it off you afterward. So decide now, quickly, while it's still just the 2 of us." Outside, something bit into the hull with a shriek of splitting timber. "Stand back from the bulkhead." Harry, hoarse, very close. "Hermione, if you can hear me, get low and get away from the—" "The wood," Hermione said. "What?" "Look at the wood, Draco." He turned. The inscription had begun to fade, not to open, not to change. It was simply losing definition, the letters going soft at their edges, the way ink goes on wet paper. And as they watched, the deep black bled out into grey, and the grey into the ordinary pale figure of the timber, and the sentence sank back into the plank it had risen from, and left no mark at all. The lamp flame went from gold to a plain, honest yellow, and stayed there. And the handle, which had turned freely for 31 hours and opened nothing, clicked. The door swung inward 2 inches on its own. Beyond it there was a passage, and daylight at the head of the companionway, and 3 inches of ordinary cold seawater running away down the boards, and standing in it, drenched, white-faced, with a crowbar in one hand and his glasses shattered across one lens, Harry Potter. He looked at her. He looked at Draco. He looked at the 2 inches of open door, and his mouth moved without producing anything. Then Ron came round the corner behind him at a dead run and stopped so hard he went down on one knee in the water. 31 hours, Ron said. 31 bloody. The whole ship's on the seabed. Do you understand that? The whole ship went down at 4 o'clock on Tuesday, and this cabin was still. His voice cracked, and he abandoned the sentence and got up and crossed the passage and put his arms round her, hard. And Hermione stood in his grip with her chin on his shoulder and her eyes open, looking past him at the blank wood of the door. They took the four of them off the wreck site on a ministry cutter with the sun coming up. That was the part Hermione could never afterward reconcile. The sun, ordinary and low and orange, laying a track across water that had gone flat and grey and reasonable, with gulls on it. The perihelion was gone. There was a slick and some floating timber and a slowly rotating hatch cover, and 11 of the crew had been picked up in the first 6 hours by a Norwegian trawler that had heard the anomaly and, being sensible, sailed away from it. Somebody put a blanket round her. Somebody put tea in her hands. She drank none of it. She sat in the cutter's cabin with her back against the bulkhead and let the curse-breaking team talk over her head. And she listened. And at some point in the 3rd hour, a woman with grey plaits and an Icelandic accent said the word that made her look up. Lacrimol. Hermione set the tea down. Say that again. The woman, Ingveldur Semundsdottir, 40 years in the Reykjavik office, hands like a stonemason's, looked at her over the top of a spread of soaked charts. Lacrimol snare, wrecker's work, 17th century west coast of Jutland, and there were maybe 9 of them ever built, and this is the first one anybody's touched in 200 years. She tapped the chart. You know the name? Lacrima. Tear. Tear, yes, but not the crying. Ingveldur's mouth was grim. The feeding. These things do not eat souls, Miss Granger, whatever the pamphlets say. They eat despair. Very specific. The wreckers built them to sit on a shoal and take ships, and a ship full of drowning men gives off a great deal of what they eat, and the ward grows fat and holds the anomaly open for the next one. Draco had come to stand in the hatchway. Hermione did not look at him. She was aware of him the way one is aware of a fire in a room. The inscription, she said. Ah. Ingveldur sat back. That is the clever part. That is the part that makes me want to dig those men up and shout at them. You know what it said? Only the one who sacrifices themselves may leave. In English, in Danish, in Dutch, in Latin, in whatever tongue you carry. Always that, always exactly that, and always a lie made out of true words. She held up 2 blunt fingers. Quod servatum est, that which is kept back, the real term. But nobody reads the preamble, and everybody reads sacrifice, and everybody thinks a life. And so 2 people in a flooding room spend their last hours trying to die for each other. And the ward feeds, said Draco. The ward feasts. Ingveldur did not look up. That is the whole engine of it. It is not a puzzle with a solution. It is a machine for producing noble misery. Every hour you spend offering to die, it takes. Every hour you spend certain you have doomed the other one, it takes twice. The riddle was never meant to be solved. It was meant to be believed. Hermione's hands had gone entirely cold. Then how does anyone get out? 2 ways. Ingveldur held up 1 finger. The ship sinks and the anomaly closes, and the room goes with it. That is how everyone gets out. The 2nd finger. Or the ward starves. The cutter's engine changed note. Somewhere above, a gull went over. Starves, Hermione said. It is a stomach, Miss Granger. It has to eat what you give it. And if what you give it is not despair. Ingveldur shrugged, and there was something almost like a smile in it, and something a great deal like awe. It cannot digest. It cannot hold. It has no other function. 31 hours it held that cabin against a sinking ship, And then, in 1 hour, it lost the whole of what it had built, and it let go, and it died. And I have been sitting here since dawn trying to work out what in God's name you two did to it. The silence in the cabin went on for a considerable time. We stopped trying to die, Draco said. Yngveldur looked at him. Then, slowly, at Hermione. Then at the space of about 4 feet between them, which neither of them had crossed in 6 hours. Yes, she said, evidently. And she gathered her charts and went out on deck and shut the hatch behind her with a tact that Hermione would remember gratefully for the rest of her life. They were alone. The engine thudded. Light came through the salt-blind port and moved on the boards as the cutter rose and fell. It wasn't a sacrifice, Hermione said. No. That's why it failed. She started to laugh, and it turned into something else halfway, and she pressed the back of her wrist against her mouth. It failed because it wasn't a loss. It went looking for the thing I'd kept back, and it found she couldn't get it out. It found the thing I wanted most, Draco. It found 9 years of wanting sitting there wearing a disguise, and a thing you want cannot be surrendered. You can only be given it. Yes, you knew, on the mattress. You knew 20 minutes before I did. I suspected. He had not moved from the hatchway. I didn't say it, because if I'd said it, you'd have thought I was making an excuse for what we'd already done, and I would rather have drowned than have you think that. And now? Now there's no water, Draco said. Now there's a boat and a sun, and Potter on the foredeck pretending not to look through the porthole every 90 seconds, and no clock at all. Which means I have to say the thing I refused to say in that room, and I find I can't do it from 4 feet away. He crossed the cabin. He stopped in front of her, and he did not touch her, and his hands were shaking exactly as they had shaken when he pinned her to a wet bulkhead a lifetime ago. "Ask me the question again," he said. "The one from the water. The door's open, Granger. The sun's out. There's a boat." She did not ask it. She meant to. The words were assembled and waiting. "Do you want this?" And she got as far as opening her mouth, and then the cutter took a swell, and the light swung across his face, and she saw what was in it, and the question died of redundancy. "No," Hermione said. Something terrible happened behind his eyes. "No, not no." She caught his wrist, appalled at herself. "No, as in, I'm not asking, because I've watched you cross 4 feet of deck to stand in front of me shaking, and I've already got my answer. And if I ask, you'll say it beautifully, and then in 6 months, you'll decide the boat was another kind of clock." He let out a breath that had been in him for some time. "That is a very Granger objection." "It's an excellent objection." "It's an excellent objection," he agreed. "And it's wrong, and I'm going to say the thing anyway, because I've spent 31 hours watching you refuse to be protected, and I've concluded it's contagious." "Draco, I have been in love with you," he said, "since the 12th of March, 1996. The engine thudded. The light moved. That's... Hermione's voice failed and had to be restarted. "That's very specific." It was a very specific afternoon. He was not looking away. That was the extraordinary thing. He had looked away from her for 14 years, in corridors, in courtrooms, across the length of a ship, and now he simply did not. You were arguing with Flitwick about the ethics of the trace, and you were winning, and you had ink on your left cheek. And it occurred to me with total clarity that I was going to spend my entire life being the sort of person who was not allowed to want that. And I went down to the lake and sat in the cold for 2 hours. You never said a word. I said a great many words, all of them appalling. That was rather the strategy. That's the worst strategy I have ever heard. It was the only one available, Draco said. And then there was a war, and after the war there was a courtroom, and you stood up in front of the whole of the Wizengamot and said 4 sentences about my mother that kept her out of Azkaban, and you did not look at me once. And I have understood since that morning that there is no arrangement of words in any language that gets me from where I was standing to where you were sitting. His mouth moved, not quite a smile. So, I stopped looking for one. I became extremely good at doors instead. It's a related discipline. Hermione discovered she was crying, and had been for some time. 6 years, she said. 6 years. You were on that ship for 11 days, and you spoke to me 40 times. I actually counted them, which is the single most humiliating fact of my adult life. 43, Draco said. She stopped. What? 43. You didn't count the 3 on the first afternoon in the corridor by the chart room, because I said something about the tide tables, and you said quite and walked off, and I've thought about it every day since, so I assure you it counts. And Hermione Granger, who had translated a 600-year-old wrecker's snare in a flooding cabin, who had stood chest-deep in the North Sea and taken a machine apart with grammar, put both hands over her face and laughed until she had to sit down on the locker. He waited. He was, she was learning, extraordinarily good at waiting. Right, she said at last, wiping her face with the heel of her hand. My turn, and then we're going up on deck, because Harry has now done 6 circuits of that porthole, and Ron will be trying to work out how to open the hatch with his elbow. You don't have to. I know I don't. That's rather the entire point of the last 2 days. She stood up. She took the front of his shirt in her fist, exactly as she had in the cabin, and he came where he was put. I didn't keep it back for a reason, Draco. That's what I've been trying to say since the water. There was never a reason I could name, and I'm a woman who names things, and every time I got to that particular threshold, something in me went absolutely still and said, no, this one is spoken for. And I never once let myself finish the sentence, because the end of it was you, and I would have had to be a person who wanted you, and I could not survive being that person while you were being. That, she agreed. Yes, thank you. So, the ward went looking for a thing you'd locked away, and found the only thing in me I'd never once refused. Her fist was still in his shirt. It couldn't be a sacrifice, Draco. I'd have given it to you at 18 if you'd asked. I'd have given it to you in that cabin with no ward at all. The room was simply the first place in 9 years where neither of us had a way out of the conversation. The cutter rose and fell. Then say the thing back, he said quietly. You've had my date. It's only fair. I don't have a date. Granger, I don't have a date. I have... She made a helpless gesture. I have a shelf. I have a shelf in my flat with a book on it I've never finished because you were reading it in the library in 4th year, and I couldn't get past page 9 without hearing your voice being unbearable about something. And I have kept that book for 10 years and moved it to 3 addresses. Her chin came up. I love you. I have loved you badly and secretly, and with a great deal of resentment for longer than is defensible. And I would like to do it properly now, in daylight, on a boat, with witnesses. And I would like to start by... She did not finish, because he kissed her. It was nothing like the cabin. The cabin had been drowning, and desperation, and the last 18 inches of air. This was a man's hands, framing her face very carefully in ordinary morning light, unhurried, as though there were an entire lifetime available, and he intended to use all of it. She felt him smile against her mouth halfway through, and that undid her more thoroughly than anything in 31 hours of dark water. Behind them, the hatch banged open. "Oh," said Ron, then in a completely different register. "Oh." They came up on deck 10 minutes later, because there is a limit to how long 2 people can remain in a cabin once Ronald Weasley has been in the doorway. The sun was properly up. The sea had turned the colour of a pewter dish, and the gulls were working over something 100 yards off the port bow, and the coast of Shetland had come up out of the haze in a long, low grey line. Harry was at the rail. He did not turn round when they came out. He waited until Hermione was beside him, and then he handed her, without comment, a mug of tea that was still faintly warm. 31 hours, he said. I know. The ship went down at 4 on Tuesday. We were 9 miles off with 2 unspeakables and a hired Norwegian, and we couldn't get within 400 yards of the anomaly, and every hour it got smaller, and I stood on that deck for a day and a half, knowing you were inside it. His hands were white on the rail. And then, at 3:30 this morning, the whole thing folded up like a paper bag, and the anomaly opened, and we went in and found one cabin sitting on the wreck with an air pocket in it that no charm in the world explains. Harry. So my question, Harry said, is what happened at 3:30 this morning? Hermione looked at the water. She could feel Draco standing perhaps 6 feet behind them, exactly as far off as a man stands when he has decided not to be a burden on a conversation. And she thought about the 6 years of that, and about a boy sitting by a lake in March, and about 43 sentences on a chart room corridor. It was starving, she said. The ward. It fed on people trying to die for each other, and we did that for a day and a half, and it grew fat on it, and then we stopped. She turned round. And I'd rather tell you the rest on land, and I'd rather tell you all of it, and I'd like you to be prepared for the fact that a considerable portion of it is going to be difficult for you to hear. Harry looked at her. Then he looked past her for a long moment at Draco Malfoy standing at the hatch with his shirt on inside out and his hair a disaster and an expression of very carefully maintained neutrality. Malfoy, Harry said. Potter. Your shirt's inside out. I'm aware. Right. Harry turned back to the rail. He drank some tea. Hermione watched approximately 9 separate expressions go across his face and be discarded, one after another, and something in her chest ached with love for him. Well, it's a long way to Lerwick. It is. Suppose you'd better start. It was 3 months later, in a flat in Bloomsbury with rain going down the window, that Hermione found the book. She was not looking for it. She was looking for a copy of Bathsheba's Comparative Wards, which she had lent to Ingveldur and got back with margin notes she considered actionable. And the wrong volume came off the shelf into her hand. A battered thing, dark green, page 9 still marked with a chocolate frog card from 1994. She stood there with it for a moment. "That's the book," Draco said from the doorway. "That's the book. Have you finished it yet?" "I have not. 10 years. 11 now." She turned it over in her hands. "I did try last month. I got to page 14 and you came in and asked me something about the Reykjavik report, and I lost the thread entirely. So I think we have to accept that the book is simply not going to happen." He came and took it out of her hands and looked at it, and she watched him understand what it was, properly, for the first time. He had heard about it on a boat, in the middle of a great many other things, and had probably assumed it was rhetoric. "You moved this 3 times, he said. 4. I forgot Ottery. Granger. Don't." She took it back. She put it on the shelf. "It's an absurd object, and it means an absurd amount, and I'd like to leave it there and not discuss it further, ever, for the rest of our lives." "For the rest of our lives," Draco repeated. The rain went down the window. "I said that on purpose," Hermione said. "I know you did. You do everything on purpose. It's the most exhausting thing about you, and I have made a study of it." He put his arms round her from behind and set his chin on the top of her head, which he did approximately 11 times a day, and which she had stopped pretending to object to in the 2nd week. The Icelandic office wrote again. They want the paper by January. They'll get it by January. They want you to name the mechanism. I've named the mechanism. You've named it Semundsdottir's starvation principle, which is generous of you, and which Ingveldur has already written to me privately to say she will not accept, on the grounds that she was 9 miles away on a boat, and you were the one standing in the water. Hermione was quiet for a moment. "Then it'll go in without a name," she said. "It's better that way. The whole error was 600 years of people believing that a hard word meant a terrible thing, that sacrifice meant dying, that love had to be paid for out of the body. If I hang somebody's surname on it, that's what gets learned. I'd rather they learned the sentence." "Which sentence?" She turned round in his arms. "A thing you have never given away is not the same as a thing you have never wanted to give," she said. "That's the paper. That's the whole of the paper. Everything else is Latin." Draco looked down at her for a long moment in the grey light off the window, and she watched the old reflex come up in him, the one that wanted to say something cutting and safe and make a corridor out of the room. And she watched him decline it, as he had been declining it, day after day for 3 months. "Say it again," he said. "Which part?" "You know which part." "I love you," said Hermione Granger, appallingly, in daylight, on purpose. And he kissed her in a warm flat above a wet street with the rain coming down and no clock anywhere in the world. And the sentence he had waited 11 years to be permitted to say went unsaid, because she already knew it, and there was all the time there had ever been.
Thank you for staying until the end. I want to tell you one small thing about writing this story. There is a moment in part 6. They are in the water. It is up to their throats, and she asked him a simple question. Not will you save me, not what do we do. She asked, do you want this? That was the hardest line to write. I wrote it 11 times because I think we all a little afraid of that question. It is easier to be noble, it is easier to say it, I will die for you, than to say I want you. One sounds brave, the other one makes you naked. While I was writing, I keep thinking about people I know. Good people. People who give and give and give, and who cannot accept the one kind word without arguing about it. I think many of us believe love has a price. We think it must hurt. We think it comes easily. It is not real. That is the lie in this story. The door tells them the same lie, and here is the moral, if there is one. The thing you want most is not a sacrifice. You cannot pay for love with pain. You can only be given it, and you have to let yourself be given it. So please, do not spend your life proving you deserve something. Just say yes. Thank you for listening. I will see you in the next story.